Welcome to A Course in Miracles, where you'll discover health and well-being through inner peace. Your host is Eloisa Ramos, EFT master and author of Beyond Self-Esteem, Discovering Your Boundless Self-Worth. Using EFT, the Ramos clearing technique, and the principles of A Course in Miracles, you'll learn how to open your mind to healing and to all that is inherently yours: deep fulfillment, vitality, joy, and inner peace.
My name is Eloisa Ramos. I'd like to welcome you to today's program, How to Trust Someone with A Course in Miracles and EFT Tapping. Today we're exploring our problem with trust and taking guidance from lessons 173 to 186, with our main focus on lessons 181, which says, I trust my brothers who are one with me, and lesson 185, which says, I want the peace of God. We aim to connect with the truth within that gives us peace and certainty. I will also be sharing my approach in using techniques like EFT and the Ramos clearing technique to help you set your intention for healing and release what gets in the way. Let's begin. The unexpected is something that scares most people. For this reason, the physical world of constant change and turmoil provides little security. It's no wonder we spend billions of dollars on all types of insurance: theft insurance, health insurance, accident insurance, disability insurance, flood insurance, fire insurance, business liability insurance, work compensation insurance, even death insurance, which we call life insurance, and so on. We want to protect ourselves from the uncertainties of life that bring to us the unexpected and unwanted, and therefore we want to protect ourselves against a life that is unstable and which we cannot control. And for this reason, it threatens us. It's a life that appears to happen to us as if it was separate from us and could really be a threat. So who can trust such a life? Who can trust anyone, including ourselves, when we see we're just as unstable and powerless, struggling like a ship without a rudder, getting tossed around by the unpredictable winds of life? It's not really possible unless we can see ourselves differently. A Course in Miracles is teaching us a different way to see life by seeing ourselves as one with all of life and not separate. For what we see in this world is just a reflection of what we think we are. Lesson 181 says, quote, I trust my brothers who are one with me, unquote. This lesson is building on all the previous lessons and assumes we have accepted that we are not separate ego bodies, but rather brothers, sharing in the creative life energy or spirit given to us by the one life source many of us call God. Only from this perspective can we truly trust each other. Let's look at why the problem of separation prevents us from trusting. When we see life and the people in our lives as separate ego body identities, we will believe that they can be different from us. If they're different from us, we will believe they will have different interests and desires. Because most of us identify with our interests and desires, we will believe that when someone does not give us what we want, they are against us, attacking us, and that we are justified in holding grievances and attacking back. Once we have done this, we will believe that people are basically out for themselves, even if it is at our expense. This makes others a threat to us. So we will see ourselves as vulnerable and weak. This makes trust very difficult, if not impossible. Here's an example. My laptop screen was going black on me this week. So I took it in to a computer expert nearby because I wanted my data backed up just in case it gave out completely. I went in and explained the problem to the owner. He asked if I had been there before, and I said yes, with my son's computer. He asked my name, found it on his computer, verified my address and phone, and said he'd take a look at it, back up the data, and then give me a call on Friday. I felt a little hesitant there because he didn't give me a receipt or quote on the cost. And he had done that previously. So I asked him, well, how much will it cost? And he gave me a verbal estimate, and I said, okay, I'm left. During the next couple of days, I noticed a slight fear around not having a receipt or an estimate in writing from him. So Friday came, and he didn't call. During the weekend, I noticed my attention focusing on a fearful thought which told me not to trust him. So I started tapping on that. So even though I have this fear that says I should not trust him, I deeply and completely accept myself. So even though I did not get a receipt or a written estimate, I deeply and completely accept myself. So even though I have this thought that says, what if I call and he claims he never received my laptop, I deeply and completely accept myself. So I did the tapping, finished the round, and what surfaced in the process was the fact that when I first walked into his office, the radio was on, and it was loud enough for me to hear a talk show host talking politics. But the words caught my attention. And basically, he was condemning the White House, something to the effect that they were intent on covering up their mistakes. And of course, he was very, enthusiastic. He was very, very convinced of what he was saying. Now, you might wonder, well, why did this come up to my awareness, and why is it relevant to what I was tapping about? And for those of us that have worked with EFT for a while, we understand there's a connection here, or it would not have shown up. Now, it's not always easy to see the connection, but I used muscle testing and my intuition to help me. So here's what I found. My mind made an automatic assumption about the computer guy when I walked in, and it was based on this particular radio show that was turned on. My mind assumed that he was Republican. They took this information and it connected it to some past resentment that I had towards Republicans, which I was not aware of. Okay? I was believing that Republicans were untrustworthy because I decided at some point in the past that they did not have my best interests in mind, because at that time I was a registered Democrat and I identified with my party. So this identification with political parties made us separate and different. And here was the root of my distrust. Okay, so can you see what my thinking did? There was no way to know with certainty whether he was Republican or not. But even if he had told me he was Republican, why should that make any difference in our relationship? It was only because I was holding a past grievance against Republicans that this made a difference in my mind. And clearing the past resentment and identification helped me to change my focus and see that we're not truly different, even when we identify with different political parties. Okay? The problem is that when we're identified with our group or with our political parties, we're not going to be able to see that we're identified, and we're going to be looking at the other group or at the individuals in the group as if they were that label, that identity. So lesson 181 wants us to notice where the focus of our attention is. So in this case, mine went automatically to the radio talk show host, dwelling on the condemnation and mistakes. And that triggered my past resentment and distrust. Lesson 181 says, quote, when you attack, and let me interject here, because distrust is an attack. Quote, when you attack a brother, you proclaim that he is limited by what you have perceived in him. You do not look beyond his errors. Rather, they are magnified, becoming blocks to your awareness of the self, with a capital S, that lies beyond your own mistakes, and past his seeming sins as well as yours. For their mistakes, if focused on, are witnesses to sins in you, and you will not transcend their sight and see the sinlessness that lies beyond. Unquote. So, when we distrust, we are focusing on mistakes and blaming others, and this will interfere in being able to forgive and see past our own mistakes. Let me make this more clear with another example. A prospective client said she had a problem with anger. It showed up with her 4-year-old son, and she could see that it was an overreaction on her part, because what he was doing was typical sibling jealousy with his younger sister. What she said was that she suspected it had to do with her having been abused by her stepfather when she was little. However, she said she had worked on that quite a bit, but what was still bothering her was that her mother allowed it to happen. Her attention was focused on her mother's error. Now, she could not see past her own error because she is now a mother too. She's identified with that role now, and doing what her mother did, allowing an older male to mistreat a little girl. The anger at her son is really anger at, quote, mother, unquote, because she blames her mother for her pain and suffering. So she has made herself guilty too. She is seeing her mother as the role she played, and so she is also that role of mother now. This role is not her true identity. She's identifying with doing, and as we saw in previous programs, when we see others as what they do, we're seeing them as bodies and separate from us. She's going to have doubts and fears about how good a mother she is until her focus can go beyond her mother's errors. This requires the release of her anger, which is a defense and another form of attack. Releasing the anger will allow her perception to see more clearly and see beyond her mother's mistakes and her own, to the innocence of her true self, and to the innocence of the true self of her mother. Lesson 181 also says, quote, we practice changing our intent. We seek for innocence and nothing else, unquote. So in this lesson, we learn to notice where our focus is and change our mind's intent, which is what guides the focus. We are instructed to remember in this lesson to remember this lesson when we catch ourselves focusing on error and blaming others. We say, quote, "It is not this that I would look upon. I trust my brothers who are one with me," unquote. This reminds us of the truth. We are not guilty nor separate, but one. Again, what's difficult is that our perception focuses on doing, and we see people as bodies doing things that we have defined and judged as wrong or sinful. We have a hard time seeing beyond the body and its doings to our essential being, which cannot be guilty if God is our creator and holy. We must share in that likeness. This lesson also assures us that we are not after a fantasy or another illusion when we ask to see our innocence. It says, quote, "For what we look upon is really there, and as our focus goes beyond mistakes, we will behold a holy, sinless world. When seeing this is all we want to see, when it is all we seek for in the name of true perception, are the eyes of Christ inevitably ours," unquote. Here, it's emphasizing that our intention needs to be whole. It cannot be split, wanting to see both error and innocence. Quote, "We enter in the time of practicing with one intent, to look upon the sinlessness within," unquote. We are now consciously trying to shift our intent, and our intent lies beyond our beliefs and shares in the power of creation because it's at the level of spirit. So in talking about intent, I want to look at what we are intending and giving attention to when we use EFT and the Ramos clearing technique. Because in my opinion, we're working with our focus and intent. When we practice these techniques, or for that matter, study A Course in Miracles, our intent and focus will be either on releasing fear and suffering, which comes from the ego-body identification, and which underlies the one problem of separation, or not. It means that we are continuing to protect our ego-body desires and identity. Either we are wanting to release illusion and opting for love and unity, or we're not, and continuing to hold on to our illusion of having a separate and independent will apart from Source. Only one of these intents will lead us to peace and healing. Lesson 185 emphasizes, quote, "We want the peace of God. This is no idle wish. These words do not request another dream be given us. They do not ask for compromise. To mean these words acknowledges illusions are in vain, requesting the eternal in the place of shifting dreams which seem to change in what they offer, but are one in nothingness," unquote. The conflict that we have is that on the one hand, we want to heal and release illusion, but on the other, we also want what the world of illusion offers us, specialness and superiority, which excludes and separates. Let me illustrate with an example. I did a free 20-minute consultation with a woman. She wanted to know if surrogate EFT, or sometimes called proxy EFT, could help her ex-boyfriend with his depression. For those of you unfamiliar with surrogate EFT. It's basically doing the tapping on ourselves as if we were the person that needed the tapping. Since we are all one anyway, in my mind, there is no other. And so yes, I told this woman that she could certainly do the surrogate EFT, and that I had helped my children and my mother who has Alzheimer's in this way. If anyone wants to know more about surrogate EFT, please just visit my website, healingwitheft.com, and go under the tab Muscle Testing to the bottom of the page, and you'll find the link Surrogate EFT. Okay, so let's get back to the story. This woman really had a different problem. She had broken up with her boyfriend a couple of months before, and because her boyfriend had planned a vacation out of the country for both of them, and he was paying her cost, he asked her if she still wanted to go with him, and he was willing to still take her on the trip. However, he said that he would only take her as a friend. The woman refused to go unless he would take her back as his girlfriend. And he would not take her back as his girlfriend, and that put her in a bind because she really did want to go on the trip. She didn't want to miss out on the trip, but she was unwilling to go only as his friend. So in her mind, she believed that it was because of his depression that he did not want her as a girlfriend anymore. So she wanted to do surrogate EFT to help him heal his depression so she could be his girlfriend again and go on this trip. So I want you to notice here her real intent. She wanted to change his mind and get what she wanted, to be his girlfriend again. So I asked her, well, why don't you just tap on yourself for the problem you have with not being his girlfriend? From my perspective, her problem was in her mind. But she was seeing the cause of her problem outside of herself in her boyfriend's depression, and basically in his mind. The problems we see outside of ourselves are only there because we're projecting them from our mind, so we can believe our mind is not responsible for them. Because of projection, she felt the need to control what would then be separate and independent from her, because she was perceiving threat, and this was to her ego, of course, in some way. But ultimately, we cannot control anything that's separate from us. And only in recognizing that our suffering is coming from our ego, body, mind, do we have control and can release the suffering. The problem was that she was trying to change reality because she believed, obviously, that she needed to be his girlfriend. And for some reason, it was not acceptable to just be his friend. So I have done work with clients that place the use of EFT in the law of attraction at the service of their ego body wishes. The internal conflict and confusion that this generates can be extreme. They're trying to use techniques and laws that are powerful precisely because they connect us to the truth that we are one, and recognize the mind is causal. And they help us recognize that the mind is causal to make manifest desires that depend on separation and the ego body identity to exist. Okay, let me see if that was clear here. So when we use techniques and laws like EFT and the law of attraction, okay, we're connecting to the truth that the mind is causal. And when we try to use them to solve problems or to manifest desires that we see are outside of us and which we believe have a cause outside of us, we are neutralizing we are blocking, more accurately, the intent of these laws, which is to help us to recognize that the problem and the cause and the solution and the power is in our mind, not outside of us. It's not separate from us. So when I use EFT and the Ramos clearing technique, my focus is on the problem in my mind as I'm seeing it, feeling it, and experiencing it. It's my interpretation that I want to release, which is presenting me with blocks to seeing clearly or perceiving clearly and experiencing the love that is there already. So here's another quick example. Both my sister and I were taking care of my mom. She asked me if we could do some EFT tapping to change how our mother was holding her legs. She had them tense and would not relax them to allow them to touch the ground where she was sitting. So I said, well, why don't you do the tapping on yourself first? Because it's bothering you that this is not the way you think it should be, right? She said, yes, I am worried that her feet are not touching the ground. So I want to be clear here, though. I'm not saying that it's not worthwhile to try to help our mother with the tightness in her legs. My point is that perception is going to be distorted when we're not addressing our own emotional energy disturbances first. We need to address our own lack of peace, which shows up as suffering first before we can offer healing to others. This became very clear to me when I was first learning muscle testing, and I was using it to help my kids that had a lot of allergies. I was not getting accurate readings, and I tried it. We were testing grapes, and I was testing a client, and her arm kept going weak. But it turned out I was the one with the energy block. I was the one with the problem to the grapes and not her. So once we make a connection, in muscle testing, when you test someone else, you're using an extended arm that you're pressing down on to test for the muscle weakness. Once I touch her arm, we're like a closed circuit. Even if I don't recognize that we are one, which we are, once I touch her hand, our bodies cannot distinguish separation there. It's one energy circuit. So if I'm testing for grapes, and I'm the one that has a sensitivity or allergy to it, and it's my energy system that has the energy block showing up, her hand, but I'm believing that I'm testing her on it. Her hand is going to go weak because the energy system is now, it's not separate. We're one energy system. So what I'm doing is I'm basically muscle testing myself with her arm, which is kind of like what surrogate muscle testing is. And therefore, I'm not going to get accurate information about her. So here, let's see. So when our intent or focus is on changing others or reality, we're seeing them as separate and focusing on what is wrong or on a mistake that needs changing. When we do this, we will not recognize our oneness and that our mind is causal and powerful. Lesson 181 is very clear when it says, quote, "Change but this focus, and what you behold will change accordingly. Your vision now will shift to give support to the intent which has replaced the one you held before. Remove your focus on your brother's sins, and you experience the peace that comes from faith in sinlessness." So here what I want to do is share how I work with the lessons and the text in A Course in Miracles, using EFT and the Ramos clearing technique, so that you can see how I release resistance to the teachings. So first of all, to be able to do this, you need to be able to notice when you're holding resistance. And resistance is simply a disturbance in our energy system. It's an opposing or a conflicting energy. It's like when two magnets come together and they're opposite poles, they push against each other. So if you're disconnected from your body and your emotions, you're going to have a difficult time noticing any resistance. This happens because we have a pattern of judging our body or emotions as unacceptable or simply as irrelevant and ignoring them. So first you need to be okay with feeling what you feel in your body when it shows up, because that's where the disturbance is going to show up. It can show up in our mind also, but because that's a little more subtle at the thought level, that's a little harder to pick up. It's a lot easier to pick up the disturbance when it's vibrating in your body. That's why emotions feel so powerful. And in fact, that's why so many of us are uncomfortable with them. What I do is I take a lesson, for example, 185, and I read it, or I can say it out loud. I want the peace of God. I pay attention to any reaction to what I'm reading. It can show up in any manner of different forms. It can show up physically. Sometimes it shows up as a doubting thought or a voice. However it shows up, I give it my attention and notice where and how it is showing up and how intense it feels. It may be a physical reaction like nervousness in my stomach or a tightness in my breath or a thought or a doubt. So in this case, I want to notice the meaning that it holds for me. So if it's a thought or a doubt, you want to notice if it's saying something, if it has a particular meaning, like, oh, that can't be true. And you want to also notice kind of the tone, because sometimes it is a voice. It's actually words there. And if you can notice the tone and also the, the energy around it, whether it's a fearful energy or, protection or whatever it is, that's also very helpful. So whatever is there, I tap on it or I use the Ramos clearing technique, which uses muscle testing. And then I watch for anything else that the tapping brings to the surface of my awareness, and I follow those leads, whatever those things are, after I'm done with clearing the initial reaction I started with. You can also take a statement and see if it's believable to you. So you can just say the statement out loud, like, I want the peace of God. And you hear yourself say it, and then you ask yourself, how true is this, 0 to 10? 10 being completely true and 0 being completely false. The number is going to give you a baseline so you can gauge whether a shift has occurred after each tapping round when you test the statement again for how true it is. So with lesson 185, I want the peace of God, I did not pick up any physical or mental reaction until I read further down. Quote, if you could but mean these words for just an instant, there would be no further sorrow possible for you in any form, in any place or time. Heaven would be completely given back to full awareness, memory of God entirely restored, the resurrection of all creation fully recognized. I was deeply impressed by the shift that would occur if I could truly mean these words. So I wanted to find out if I really meant them when I said them, even though I couldn't, feel any disturbance. So I used muscle testing. I do a finger over finger, and I also have this on my website. It's also under the muscle testing tab. I believe it's under surrogate muscle testing. And so I asked myself, do I only want the peace of God with all my heart, soul, and mind? And I got a no. And so for those of you that aren't familiar with muscle testing, the weak and the strong signals are associated with either a yes or a no. And if you ask very specific questions, you can get pretty accurate responses, but you do have to check around. There's a lot to the accuracy of muscle testing, and I also talk about that on my website. So anyway, I got this no, that I do not want the peace of God with all my heart, soul, and mind. And so I take those answers and I consider them. I took this no and I just sat with it. Okay, I do not want only the peace of God with all my heart, soul, and mind. I let that sink in, and after I did that, I became aware that what was saying no, I do not want only the peace of God, was not my true self. That no that I got was in my mind, but it was not coming from a place of truth. It was an ego thought. Now with this awareness, I repeated the muscle test. Do I only want the peace of God with all my heart, soul, and mind? And I got a yes. And that was the truth. Okay. Now, what happens is that we're actually going into the subconscious beliefs. We're looking at our thinking and what's stored in the subconscious mind with the muscle testing. And just because I got a yes, I do want the peace of God with all my heart, mind, and soul, doesn't mean that there are not other thoughts that are contradicting that. So you have to be very thorough when you're doing the questions, and it does take intuition to kind of know what question to ask next, kind of a thing. So to be able to find all the contradicting thoughts, all the resistance, you have to ask related questions. And so what I did, I asked, do I mean these words? I want the peace of God completely. It's like a double check that I do. And I get a no. So there was resistance to meaning those words 100%. And this particular resistance I could sense energetically in my mind. So more and more, because more and more my mind is recognizing that this resistance is not coming from me but ego. The tapping was necessary here to release the resistance because the awareness itself released it. Ultimately, it's the truth in our mind, recognizing illusion for what it is, nothing, that clears the resistance. Okay, that clears the energy block. And that's all that resistance is. It's an energy block, and it can come from emotions, from thoughts, from memories, from judgments, from imaginings. So a bit later in the lesson, where it said, quote, no one can mean these words and not be healed, unquote. I muscle tested again whether I meant these words. This time I noticed fear in my body. I could sense the fear talking to me and a feeling that I had to listen. And so when I tuned into that, I wonder, well, okay, why? Why do I have to listen? Why is that so? And so I explored that question with my muscle testing to see if I was supposed to listen to it. Because it had that feeling of, quote, I have no choice but to listen to it, unquote. So when I asked, am I supposed to listen to this fear? I got a yes. So then I used the Ramos clearing technique to release that idea. And my mind realized, hey, that's not my fear. And the fear cleared. So what I do is I double check to see if there are more layers and ask again, quote, I want the peace of God, and I get a no. Now here, what comes up is a sense that the peace of God implies loss, that I lose my independent will if I truly have the peace of God. But because I've studied A Course in Miracles for a few years now, my mind has learned that my independent will is not really possible. So I muscle test and ask if I'm believing my independent will is real, and I get a yes. And so I use the Ramos clearing technique and clear that belief. And then I retest again. I want the peace of God. Now I get a yes. So now I can say the words and I can connect with their meaning 100%. And what I mean by 100%, it's a feeling of no resistance, so that the energy of I want the peace of God comes down all the way through to the level of my body, and in my body there's no energy blockage or resistance or opposition there. I can feel the energy free. I can feel it open. But nevertheless, I retest throughout the day and week, because when we're working with the subconscious mind with muscle testing, we can't see what's in there. That's why it's subconscious. So it's almost like there's a little kid carnival game that I used to do when I was little, and it was called Go Fishing, and you throw the fishing line over this little wall to see what kind of prize you would get. And it was basically just a clothespin with a string that you would throw over, and there would be somebody else behind the screen, and they would attach, a little toy or something. And of course, you never know what you got. Well, that's how I see muscle testing. I throw this line over this wall, and I don't always know what I'm going to get, but I'm open to seeing what I'm going to get, so that I don't get my own intent or my own wishes in the way. And it's a matter of just doing it over and over and over. So, what happened upon retesting later was that I found some fear in the back of my neck, and so I released that. So this is the process that I use with Course in Miracles, and in the past I have spent several days on one lesson, sometimes even a week, because it resonates very deeply with me, and I relate to wanting the peace of God in a very deep and immense way. The peace of God means everything to me, and perhaps it's because I've experienced moments of deep, indescribable peace. And I know with certainty that it is the most important thing to have in this life for me. So I found it interesting to notice the shift that came after doing this lesson. I want the peace of God. I was noticing that I wasn't worried at all about coming up with a topic or a theme for this week and doing the posting on time for the outline and the description. And this was Thursday night, and I had the deadline the next day. So I definitely noticed that, because in the past there was disturbance there. I was stressed. And the other thing that happened was that let me back up a little bit. So this was Thursday night, and I had the deadline the next day. And what was interesting is that I was taking time to do other things, and in the past that had bothered me, and it wasn't bothering me at all. In fact, there was an underlying certainty that it was going to get done, and therefore there was nothing to worry about. And of course it did get done on Friday. So what happened later is that I was recalling that sense of trust that I felt in that certainty that the Friday deadline was going to be met. And as I recalled that, I noticed a feeling of uncomfortableness showing up. I found that interesting, and I said, well, wait a minute. What? Am I not used to feeling so certain? Is that making me uncomfortable now? And so, yeah, that's what was happening. So I tapped on it. Even though it feels uncomfortable to feel certainty and to trust that sense of certainty, I deeply and completely accept myself. This incredible peace that comes with certainty is not something that I experience all the time. And therefore, I thought it was interesting that what becomes the norm for us is what we experience most of the time. And then when we're not experiencing that, when we're experiencing the opposite, that becomes uncomfortable. And this is how we have reversed our state of being. from certainty to believing that what's normal is insecurity and distrust and uncertainty. And in fact, when we clear those, we can feel like, wait a minute, this doesn't feel right. It's not what I'm used to. And we'll react to it. So that's what this uncomfortableness was all about. The other thing I noticed was that there were doubts and fears circling around in my mind, but they didn't have any weight, and it was as if they couldn't land, like they couldn't come through and land into my body, because my mind was just not giving them importance. And later I was thinking, okay, now I need to get going on the actual writing of the content for the program. But I was at my mom's house, and even though I had time to work on it, I didn't have the book. So another thought showed up that said, gosh, I should have brought the book with me. But rather than disrupting my energy and having that thought take me into an emotion like, disappointment or regret or guilt, this thought was met with another thought that said, I guess that's okay. And as soon as that thought showed up, and I said, yeah, that's okay, that I can't work on it, what followed was this sense of certainty that the talk was already done. The certainty came from another level, the level of spirit, of energy, and it was not just the talk. Everything had already been done and accomplished, meaning that God's plan has been and is accomplished, and therefore there's nothing for me to do other than follow along. So here, the independent will steps out of the way, and it's not me that's accomplishing anything, for there's nothing really to be accomplished. I'm just here to witness or to making that God's plan manifest in this world. And this is basically what Lesson 186 says. Quote, salvation of the world depends on me. Here is the thought of true humility, which holds no function as your own, but that which has been given you. It offers your acceptance of a part assigned to you, without insisting on another role. It does not judge your proper role, it but acknowledges the will of God is done on earth as well as heaven. It unites all wills on earth in heaven's plan to save the world, restoring it to heaven's peace. Unquote. So, salvation is not a plan that I make and I appoint myself to. My mind has a function given to it by God. My part is to accept it or to open up to it. And in this process, my mind is healed. And this is what saves the world. For the world of uncertainty, separation, fear, and death is but our mind's miscreation. Our mind fulfills its function when it returns to certainty in its true identity of eternal love and oneness, something it has never really lost. This is why it is a journey without distance. We just come back to where we started from, which is truth. This concludes our program for today. I want to thank you for joining me, and I hope you'll join me in 2 weeks for our next program. And blessings to everyone.
For more information about EFT, muscle testing, working with Eloisa, And to download a free version of the Ramos Clearing Technique, visit www.healingwitheft.com.